This is a TwoFront podcast.
I would say the vast majority of our partners probably at one point in time said they would never join a group.
Just for the record, I do not believe single practice ownership is the future. I came from a family of physicians where I basically didn't see my parents ever, like literally ever. They were always either practicing or running their practice.
It's really a blend of trying to bring what is great about private practice and what really works and is competitive in group practice, and empower our partners to be successful. And our company is built around identifying those different aspects of what makes that partner ultimately click, creates long-term longevity with that partner to make sure we want our partners to be around for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But it's not simply dependent upon what they can do chairside.
You got a crooked smile, well that don't bother me much. You double over, working double time, you double tough. I'll just shine it up until the sun hit like a glare. I gotta dare, get the fuck up out the chair.
Happy dentists, picture this. You've built a successful practice, but you're still finding yourself doing payroll at midnight, negotiating with insurance companies, and handling HR issues in between patients. You're making great money, but you have no time to actually enjoy it. Sound familiar? This is why I'm so excited to introduce Justin Carroll, COO of MB2, one of the most respected dental partnership organizations in the country. What fascinates me about MB2's approach is how similar it is to our mission at TwoFront. We both believe that dentists shouldn't have to do it all themselves. While MB2 helps practice owners with the business side of running a practice, TwoFront is helping dentists focus on helping more patients prevent dental work with clear aligners, while we support on the closing, the clinical side, and the time management, so that dentists don't have to master Invisalign on top of everything else. I truly believe that Justin's insights on partnership, clinical autonomy, and building community are exactly what we need to hear in 2025. Welcome to The Happy Dentist. I'm Dr. Ingrid Mura, and I can't wait for you to hear Justin's story. Today, I am very excited to share a new type of guest that we haven't actually had on the show before. I believe you're guest number 25, Justin Carroll. Welcome to the show, COO of MB2, which for those of you who don't know, probably has the best reputation of any DSO in the country that I've heard of. So really honored and excited to have you and to dive into the world of dentistry through group organizations. Welcome.
I appreciate you for having me, Ingrid.
Amazing. So listen, there's so many questions that I have for you, but before we get into it, I would love to just ask you, could you share your journey into becoming one of the leading executives in the DSO space in the country?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a little background, I've been with MB2 in this position now for coming up on 11 years.
Wow.
Prior to coming over to MB2, I was doing distressed and special situations, private equity investing. So a large kind of alternative investment manager based here in Dallas. We did a lot of healthcare investing, but at that point in time, zero dental. And the reason for that is in that point in time, to be honest with you, there was zero distress or kind of turnaround situations in the dental world. But we did a lot of other adjacent kind of healthcare investing, it's probably about 85% of what I've done. So I love the healthcare space. And I always kind of found in situations, particularly on the distress side, of what goes wrong in a company. And a lot of times in the healthcare world, I've always seen it's alignment with the providers, the people that ultimately generate revenue in the business. A lot of healthcare companies, I view at least historically, have really gotten that piece wrong, thinking simply it's a boardroom type decision without the alignment of the most important part, which is the doctors. I got introduced to MB2 kind of randomly, to be completely honest with you, Ingrid. I was actually at a happy hour for my wife's birthday, and now a colleague of mine for 11 years, Justin Puckett, had recently started over here, was giving me an idea around what Dr. V had created. And take it back, this was 40 locations and really not any sort of conceptual idea around creating a very large DPO. It really built the business based on what makes sense for doctors. How do doctors have true equity within their practices? And ultimately, what support do they need, short-term and long-term, to be successful and have satisfaction, kind of your point before, in their careers and their overall journey as being an entrepreneur, but also a dentist. That intrigued me. He was actually asking me if I knew anyone that'd be interested, that might want to come over and meet him. I was a little bit burnt out, in the private equity investment world. You're working 100-hour weeks. It gets a little bit old
Wow.
after a while. That's funny. We actually had a portfolio company down the street where our corporate office is here, a little outside of Dallas. I scheduled a meeting over there, popped over here. I remember calling my wife when I left, and I said, "Hey, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to join a dental company." She's like, "You're out of your mind. Like, what do you think you're doing?" Like it's unique. He had built the most important piece of any company, in my opinion. It's the model, and MB2's model wasn't built in a boardroom. I think that's the big differentiating factor of our company versus a lot of our competitors. It wasn't a strategic idea amongst a bunch of business guys and investors saying, "Hey, how can we capitalize on market opportunity? Try to
Yeah.
build this company and flip it to another group." It was really built on what makes sense for dentists. And then we had to figure out the other piece of it was, how do you get capital into this business and people to believe that this is the right model? So
Wow. Okay.
long-winded introduction to how I ended up with MB2.
I mean, so you've been MB2 pretty much from the beginning because TwoFront started 16 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, so originally, the company started in about 2007, and again, small. The model was built on, Dr. V had a few private practices, started to develop associates within those practices. Those associates ultimately kind of had that same entrepreneurial spirit and said, "Hey, I'm going to go open up another location. I'm going to do a de novo out in a different city. Don't worry, I won't compete against you, but I want to be an owner." And the light bulb clicked and said, "Hey, why don't we co-invest and do this together? I'll
Wow.
support you. I'll kind of give you training and guidance of how to think like an owner." And it started to take off over time. And then really the idea then was, okay, what support do we need to make these practices more efficient? And so, I think that the basic blocking and tackling stuff started to be created here behind the scenes of finance, accounting, payroll, legal, compliance, those sort of aspects, and really has evolved over time, really dependent upon kind of talking to our partners of like, where do you need the most assistance? Where do we need help? And then continue to develop out teams, talent, and resources to be able to support those initiatives.
Man, I'm listening to your story in so much awe because you're 18 years in, or MB2 is 18 years in, right? And first of all, I can't imagine like how I'm feel humbled thinking about your journey and like who knows, like back then, did you think that you'd be where you are now 11 years ago?
No, absolutely not. I be completely honest with you. I knew it would take off. So it was not till about 3 years into me coming on board that we brought in our first outside capital. And so kind of prior to that, our growth
Wow.
was somewhat limited. We didn't have a large, capital source bringing money into us to be able to go out and co-invest and acquire practices. And really, the whole concept was of capital raising was looking amongst our existing partners and co-investing alongside each other. And a little bit of what we
Usual.
do today has kind of evolved into that. We've really kind of kept that core competency. If you look at all of our dentist partners or equity holders in our holding company, other investment vehicles, and then owners obviously in their practices. And so the evolution where it was we need partners to pull capital together so we can start to grow this business has evolved in giving our partners opportunities to continue to co-invest and be part of the broader organization and obviously benefit from the financial success of their individual office, but also as the collective entire company as a whole.
Which is the coolest thing ever. So let me just like break this down because I feel like I understand that high level, and I'm sure our listeners also understand that your model high level. Just for the record, I do not believe single practice ownership is the future. I came from a family of physicians where I basically didn't see my parents ever, like literally ever. They were always either practicing or running their practice, right? Like from at night, doing their charts, doing all their paperwork, legal, everything, right? And I don't think that's real. I don't think that's reality anymore. I think the future is freedom. I think real wealth is freedom. And I think that as a single practice owner, you'll never have freedom. You can't do it all. And so I really believe that a model like yours is the future. And you guys are at what, about 700 practices now? Is that right?
About 780 now.
780. Okay. Wild over an 18-year journey, right? To go from a couple practices to 780. So what I want to ask you is, I think that doctors need real freedom to be really truly happy, which is the core thesis of this podcast, right? And to me, freedom means freedom to work when you want, where you want, and make as much money as you want. So if you're comfortable with it, I'd love to just dive into the meat of it. How much freedom do your doctors have at MB2?
Yeah, significant. I mean, we really built the company, Dr. V built the company around that idea that an individual doctor shouldn't be chained to the chair, if you will, right?
Mhm.
Having the optionality to determine what makes the most sense for his or her practice, that could be, it varies. And you look at our entire ownership group. So we have about 755 doctor partners, so equity holders within their existing practices and also partners across the entire organization. And the
Wow.
variability in terms of what I would say satisfaction really depends upon what the goals of that individual ultimately are. You have some partners that are very specific around being clinically involved within their practices. They love working with their two hands. You have some that like mentoring, developing, and training associates. You have some that really like just being entrepreneurs and being part of a broader organization. And, our company's built around identifying those different aspects of what makes that partner ultimately click, creates long-term longevity with that partner, to make sure we want our partners to be around for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But it's not simply dependent upon what they can do chairside. We want to make sure that they're involved within the organization more broadly. And ultimately, I kind of use the term a lot, adding value. And from our perspective, a partner is not solely adding value based upon seeing patients. That's one aspect of it. But you can add value into an organization like this in multiple different ways, bringing in new great partnership opportunities that maybe otherwise wouldn't have existed. You kind of said before, the market as a whole, in terms of, people willing to at least consider talking to a group like MB2 has significantly shifted, particularly over the last 5 years. I would say the vast majority of our partners probably at one point in time said they would never join a group.
Yeah.
They never would even consider it. And the models have shifted a lot. And we were really the first to do this, is really blending the positive aspects of private practice and the positive aspects of group practice, and not trying to make everything fit into the same box of trying to force feed all central services within an office, or simply not add value from a company standpoint and force all the practices just to function on their own. It is really a blend of trying to bring what is great about private practice and what really works and is competitive in group practice, and empower our partners to be successful. And success, to your point, I think varies. Some of it is, being able to go play golf on Friday and not working chairside. Some is just, hey, I've replicated myself and I've got 2, 3 associates working in the office. I'm the clinical director here. I set the tone of how I expect the patient experience to be. Awesome. It's being able to flex and really kind of figure out what makes the most sense.
I love it. And, I think probably a lot of what you struggle with is similar to what we struggle with internally at TwoFront. The problem that I see is that we don't get any sort of training on business as dentists. And so we see you guys as whoa, you must be wanting to take something from me. You know what I mean? And it honestly, I practiced for a couple years and then I started my company because I realized that we need a better way to practice orthodontics.
Mhm.
And in short, it wasn't until a couple years in, having raised capital, having learned what business even was, like hiring, managing cash flow, figuring out a business model and operations, raising more capital, that I realized, oh, business can be good. Business can be used for good. It is a vehicle for good. And what I love about MB2 is that that's how you guys started. Dr. V has this vision for the future of how dentistry should be. And I love what you're saying about, you can use our services if you want. You don't have to. You want to use other services? Great. So I'm curious, at MB2, when you qualified to become an MB2 doctor and you get accepted into the network, what services do doctors, if they want to take advantage of all the services, what do they never have to worry about again?
Yeah. So the ones we kind of call it are required is you can't do your own accounting anymore. We've got to do the books. So finance account. I always say these are the most boring things that if anyone's that passionate about it, they're probably in the wrong space. So finance and accounting, payroll, benefits administration, legal and compliance. That's very standardized across the entire organization.
And why do you make
Everything,
this required?
because we have investors, right? And
Yeah.
investors have a certain requirement to ensure that the reliability of financial reporting, that be our
Mm,
lenders, our equity investors, has to be top notch, completely accurate, very, very standardized. And so
makes sense.
any organization of scale has to do these things. Same sense too is, from like a payroll perspective, it's just massively inefficient if every office was trying to do their own payroll. And so we looked at the things that I would call completely non-value add from the doctor perspective, right? It's not interacting whatsoever with patient experience. I kind of use that the term as a value add within a dental practice. Everything else that we built over the years has really been, talking to partners, saying where are pain points that exist within the office. Revenue cycle management support. We have offices that we do everything post-claim submission on the rev cycle side. We have offices where we'll handle, certain aspects of the revenue cycle management process. Marketing, payer strategy, procurement, our business development team, all of those things, doctor recruitment, doctor relations, have really been based on, okay, this is something that is a pain point within the office. We have the resources here centrally that we can take all of that on if necessary, a portion of it on. We determine ultimately with that partner, what makes sense to centralize. And sometimes, more importantly, I think a lot of people get it wrong, it's what doesn't make sense. If the office is extremely efficient at revenue cycle management, there's no cost synergies to do a lot of these things. It's simply because it's adding value to the practice, taking away from the patient experience, that we should go ahead and centralize that. Or are they really, really bad at it and we can help them out and be able to collect way more efficiently? But if it's functioning properly and it's doing really well, there's no reason to try to take that out of an office. I think
100%.
that's where a lot of things get wrong, where you have too much of a corporate infrastructure kind of top-down approach of saying, hey, we're better than you at these sort of things, we're going to take it over. And the reality is, offices are extremely efficient, and the partnerships that we tend to attract are very efficient practices. We don't do turnarounds, we don't do troubled situations. So we want to figure out where we can add value to help that practice, that partner, their team, continue to be able to grow in the most efficient manner possible.
Okay, I love it. Help me understand, like I'm a 5-year-old dentist, I've got it. 5-year-old dentist. I've got a practice that's or actually, I would rather know, like, the average practice that comes into MB2. How many practices do you guys acquire a year right now?
For the last 3 years, it's been about 100 a year.
Okay, so the average MB2, maybe also the median MB2 practice, right? Like, what are they coming in with? What's
Yeah,
the deal?
the average practice that we bring in is around $2 million of revenue, 500,000 or so of EBITDA.
Okay, and so if I'm a dentist selling to you guys, how can I think about my life a year after selling from a cash, what I'm taking home, and, what my day looks like differently?
Yeah, and so cash flow coming home in that sort of scenario there, if it's a $2 million, typically you have an associate within the office, 500,000 of EBITDA. That is after doctor compensation. So let's say you had 400,000 of doc compensation for your own two hands. That doesn't go away. That continues. And then you're going to get the 40% or whatever that percentage split is of the remaining distributions going forward. And so if you
Meaning the
were
EBITDA?
making, what's that?
Meaning the EBITDA?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you think
Okay.
the EBITDA would be the cash flow of the office, assuming there's not any capital expenditures and those sort of things. And so you're
Okay.
getting the first 400 out there, and then another whatever 300 or 250 or so post. And so you might be selling 40% of your practice, and obviously you're being paid up front. You think about the term like a multiple of earnings, right? The
Yeah.
most simplest way to think of that is how many years of cash flow you're being paid for. So if someone values your practice at 6x, you're getting paid 6 years of cash flow up front.
Meaning 6 years of the EBITDA.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So let me make sure I'm understanding this. So you have a $2 million practice, you've got an associate as a doctor and making $400,000, right? Of, what I'm paying myself as a salary. So I sell to MB2 and I can expect to take home $400,000, which is what I was making before. Then of that $500,000 of EBITDA remaining, 40% will now go to you guys to manage everything that I hate to do and basically get that freedom. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, in that scenario, 60% would go to us if we acquired 60% of the practice. But
60%.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yep. And
And
then,
you'd get 6 times multiple upfront of that EBITDA.
yeah, if that's what the practice was valued at. Exactly.
Sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, look, I would view it, and I think the industry has gone very financial. So I don't want the conversation to steer too financial of just thinking, hey, how can I squeeze as much as possible? If you're thinking about partnering with a group, now upfront valuation is extremely important. But in today's world, for a dentist, you're typically not getting, let's say it's a 6X deal. People are not going to give you 6 turns of cash up front today. Now,
Um,
historically, that was probably the case, right? Someone would write you a check and buy 100% of your practice, and you become an employee in that office. Those models have really shifted, right? And to some extent, a little bit of our entry into the space of kind of painting a path to a different model to where, yes, you're receiving value up front for what you have built, but you're remaining on as an owner within that practice. And you have a partnership that comes into place to take the value of the equity you have remaining in your office and alongside the company continue to grow that. So we always want to create a situation that you're giving a second bite of the apple. You probably heard that term before, right? A second or third or fourth bite of the apple. And so you're diversifying away from solely thinking about what is the value of my individual practice and how can I have a diversification stream of investment opportunities with a group. I say that is it's important to note that, when you're looking at partnering with a group, it's now going to have a portion most likely of cash and sort of equity portion within that business. There's, I don't know, 150 private equity backed DSOs, DPOs out there in the space today.
yeah.
And so be really diligent around what that equity you're receiving is ultimately, right? What is the value of that today? How is it being valued? And ultimately, what is the track record that my dollar of equity today becomes monetizable or worth something in the future, but also what effective rate of return should I be expecting on that as well?
So, Justin, let's break that down because I'm sure none of our listeners, including myself, can really understand how to value equity of a DPO or a DSO. So, for most clinicians who don't even know how to think about equity, how should they think about equity if they're thinking about selling to one of these 150 private equity backed DSOs or DPOs?
Yeah, look, the most important thing, in my opinion, is track record. What is the track record of the existing team that is in place within that company and their ability to grow equity value within an organization? But also, I think most importantly, create optionality for liquidity opportunities for partners. So it's one thing of what is my value on a piece of paper? It's another of, am I actually receiving distributions or monetization through recapitalizations within this organization?
So
Are
let
they
me break that down
successful?
real quick
Yep.
for our listeners.
Yep. Yeah. Keep going.
Because
Yeah, keep breaking me
to be
down.
honest, like 4 years ago, I would have been like, "What are you talking about?" So just to break it down, like, what is the value of that equity? First of all, are you going to grow it based on how successful you and the executive team's backgrounds are at growing the value of a company? And will you get paid out a portion of that and when and how much, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Is the best way to do it. And starting with, look, you never expect everyone to be a valuation expert, right? But also understanding is like, what is the methodology? Because private companies mark their equity wherever they want to some
Yeah.
extent, right?
Yeah.
We're not publicly traded companies. You can't go on Yahoo Finance right now and figure out
Yeah.
exactly what is MB2's stock worth. And so when we bring in a new partnership and we're issuing stock as a portion of that partnership, we value our equity alongside the last 3 transactions that we've done. So where we brought in outside capital, sophisticated private equity investment of how the company was valued in those situations, we use the exact same methodology because that's what we expect it to ultimately be in the future. You've a lot of groups that maybe have never done that before, right? And okay, how is that being valued today? Versus what does that really look like in terms of something that's reasonable and or it can actually be achieved in that sort of situation. That being the first thing, and the second piece is there the opportunity for this to grow? How is it going to grow? What is the method for growth? Is it simply financial arbitrage of buy, and hope that someone's going to come take the problem of everything you've duct taped together and buy it and pay a premium for it? 5, 6, 7 years ago, probably the case. But the private equity world, in my opinion, has become far more sophisticated, not just in dental. You look at all multi-site healthcare. There, as I said before, getting into the space, coming from that world, there was no distress in this industry. I mean, it was pretty hard from a company with interest rates as low as they were and pricing as low as it was, to be honest with you, it was pretty hard to mess things up to the point where you couldn't create equity value. The market's changed a lot. You now see a lot more distress in the space, in dental and also in just more broad, multi-site healthcare and physician practice management companies. And so you want to make sure you're partnering with a group that has a track record of success of actually growing equity value and actually returning capital back to their partners.
And how do dentists that are assessing MB2 or any other DSO or DPO assess if the executive team has created that value and issued cash to
Yeah.
their dentists?
It's the first thing I'd ask them. We bring every single
Yeah.
partner in that we're looking to bring on to what we call a discovery day. So if
Yeah.
you were coming to think about joining MB2, you come to Dallas, meet all the department heads, meet the management team, have these types of conversations of, okay, how is my equity being valued? What does this
Mm.
mean long term? What is the strategy of ultimately the next step of the company? What's the track record historically that your partners have seen? Not only in, back to the whole satisfaction thing, talk to partners. I would reach
So
out and
let
say,
me
hey,
ask you something.
yep.
Let me ask you something. So there's two ways that your DPO can grow, and it's by acquiring new practices or by driving organic growth, right? And when you say distress, when you're talking about distress, are we talking about acquiring new practices that you can then put through your infrastructure and make them more successful? Is that what we're referring to?
Yeah. Well, I say distress in the space would be, a company's capitalized at a certain level of debt, right? And they get some money that comes into the company and go out and start making acquisitions with that money. And comes into back to the whole valuation play. What am I acquiring? Is it a stable cash flow stream? I expect this practice, let's say it was 500,000 of EBITDA. Is it going to become 520 next year? Is it going to stay at 500 or is it going to become 200? Dental practices are variables. This is a human capital business. And where you've seen distress that's happened within the space is aggressive acquisition growth, the inability to integrate those offices,
Mm.
underperformance within those offices. So back if you thought it was, if let's say you bought all those at 6 or 7 times earnings and they're all underperforming today, now you effectively bought them for 8, 9, 10 times as a whole. Your leverage covenants within any organization is not going to go north of 6. Most smaller companies, probably 4, 4.5. At that immediate point in time, although you're growing on paper, you're not actually growing as it relates to deleveraging the business and adding value to the equity. And the equity becomes impaired and puts all of that equity at risk. And that's what you've seen with some of these companies that have had to hand over the keys to the lenders. What's ultimately happening there is all the equity within the business is not worth anything anymore. And the lenders are at a point where they're now into the equity and take over the business.
Okay, so let me see if I can break this down
Yep.
for myself and also for our listeners. So your MB2 grows every year, right? Like, do you guys consistently grow, whether it's through acquisitions of the 100 practices or through
We,
organic
yep.
growth?
So the last 10 years, we've grown on average over 30% each year compounding.
Wow, which is like wild. But what you're saying is that you need to take into account that growth relative to these distressed assets and how much debt you have and whether you're successfully integrating them and basically extracting value from those assets. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just adding locations doesn't increase value within an organization, right?
Yeah.
It's the quality, it's the sustainability, it's can you add value to those? You have to have, in order to grow an organization like this, or I'd say, really any kind of multi-site business, you have to have organic growth. You can't solely rely on acquisitions. You can't solely rely on organic growth, or let's call de novo. You can throw there in there as well. You kind of have to have a multi-pronged approach, in my opinion, to where you're adding value in each of those different areas. And so our growth comes from acquisitive growth, bringing in new partnerships, organic growth, consistent organic growth every year, around 4 to 5%. And then selectively adding de novos as well within our market. So it's a little bit of a 3-pronged approach in terms of how we look at adding value within the organization.
Okay, incredible. So I want to talk about this concept of organic growth because I recently saw some pretty scary statistics, which is that dentists are going to continue to make less and less, even though, inflation is rising and yada, yada, yada. So you're saying that your practices grow through organic growth 4 to 5% a year. What is your organic growth? How do you support your practices from an organic growth perspective?
Yeah, you think about top line revenue is a component of volume and pricing, right? And so our 4%, we get about 2% of pricing improvement. I mentioned before, one of the services or teams that we have here at our central office is our payer strategy team. And so about 3 years ago, we really started to heavily invest in this side. And to be honest with you, payer strategy 3, 4 years ago was kind of a subset of our credentialing team, right? We're negotiating with payers, we're trying to get wins, but it really wasn't a core focus around how do we strategically develop relationships with payers, be more proactive in terms of negotiations in specific markets, and also how do we think about payer optimization within our existing practices, meaning you're not guaranteed that you're going to get pricing wins. As everyone probably listening to this knows, PPO insurance companies aren't in the business of trying to increase all of our fees, right? You have to
Mhm.
give them a reason why they need to be increasing fees. And being part of a group assists with that because there's certain needs that payers have in different markets that larger groups can bring to the table and have a more um, strategic way of going about getting pricing wins. But in the same sense, too, is looking at where there's opportunity for optimization on the pricing side. What I mean by that is, each market's a little bit different. We kind of look at an individual office and from a capacity perspective, um, you know, we're busting at the seams and we don't have the opportunity to expand into an adjacent space or add additional operatories. And there's this immediate need to bring in another associate dentist within the practice. You kind of reach that inflection point where you can start to think more strategically around payer optimization. What is our participation? What are the value adds of each of these individual participation levels of payers? What's our effective rates? What's the patient retention side? What are we getting new patients? All those different aspects that I'm thinking through, maybe we need to look at kind of re-optimizing what we're in network with within this practice and getting an effective pricing win there as well.
Okay,
And
so let me see if I got this. So so for all of our listeners and myself included, one of the biggest things you can help with, and my dad used to talk to me about this all the time, is basically getting more money from insurance, which you have more leverage as an organization. Step 1, right?
step one, yep.
Step 2 is once you have tons of patients from these insurances, taking a look strategically at whether you even need to be with them based on things such as, are those patients even staying with you? Patient retention. Is it valuable to your practice from an insurance standpoint and other things like that? And have a team to basically assess your insurance pool and say, should you be with these? Yes or no. So the doctor doesn't have to worry about that.
Exactly. And I think it's important too for us, that's ultimately, in terms of payer participation, the doctor's final decision, right? And so we'll do the heavy lifting and the homework to say this is what makes the most sense from a math perspective. However, we have doctors that are very passionate about specific payer, and not that many are passionate about payer, but Medicaid's an example. We don't do a lot of Medicaid, but you have some offices that a doctor, it's an important part of their community outreach, right? And they
Yeah.
want to continue that. We don't say, hey, we don't do Medicaid, you got to get rid of that. We evolve and we say, okay, that makes complete sense. Let us help you, kind of give you what our recommendations of what we would do within the practice, but they have the final say in that.
Okay, amazing. So that's one part of organic growth or basically growing the practice revenue, right? Is helping with the insurance. What are other factors that you
Yeah,
guys help with in terms of driving organic
we
growth?
going back to that the revenue formula, right? So you have the
Yeah.
pricing component, the volume component. I'll start with volume being just blocking and tackling around the sense of pre-appointing patients, marketing strategy, retention optimization, things that everyone does, but a lot of times are not being measured, and there's not a real systematic way of going about some of that, right? We do also a lot of capacity expansions, and that could be in multiple forms. We have a doctor talent acquisition team that works with our partners to say, hey, we've kind of reached an inflection point within this practice. It makes sense to go ahead and add another associate. Um, It's a huge value add for a partner to be able to add an associate. It's not to go cannibalize their individual production, but it's we built a patient base up to can support another doctor. And from an owner of the practice, that's highly accretive to that distribution stream that they're ultimately going to get. And so helping them do the heavy lifting of identifying that candidate, getting that candidate onboarded. Back to what I said before, though, it's important to note that we don't make the final hiring decision for a doctor. We're never going to hire a doctor and they're going to show up at your office the next day and be like, "Go, have fun, good luck." It's a very cohesive, strategic initiative amongst that partner and our teams here to put the right candidate in place and be able to drive capacity increases through doctor days, right? And then on the other side too, physical expansions, right? We love to continue to reinvest within our practices, adding additional operatories, adding new equipment, busting out the wall and adding adjacent space. Thinking about also, are there specialties that we could potentially bring within the office? Is that something that's of interest to that doctor partner? How do we procure that? How do we get that in place? So more or less trying to not put so much dependence upon one individual's two hands, diversify the revenue streams within that office, and make sure we're maximizing capacity to its full extent.
Wow, it honestly sounds like a dream. So, just so I'm understanding this correctly, from the capacity standpoint that you guys support with, so you take a look at the practices and say, "Hey, you guys are ready for an associate, and here's a model where it's not only not going to eat into your profit, you're actually gonna benefit from a financial standpoint from having this associate, and we're gonna help you find that person and integrate them successfully into your practice."
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think one thing that I've learned over the past 7 years is this concept of trading time for money. And I think for the longest time until now, I think dentists have hit this point where they focus entirely on money without focusing on their time and how important their time is. And I think, I just want to put this out here for our listeners because I know I experienced that. I was working 6 days a week as an orthodontist in New York City, and I was making a bunch of money. I speak Spanish, so I was able to negotiate great rates. I was making a ton. I thought that the money was gonna make me happy. I'm going out there, like, buying all the designer things, and none of it made me happy. And so that's kind of the premise of this entire podcast, The Happy Dentist, is money isn't necessarily it. There's way more beyond that than you need to be happy. And I think what MB2 has done so successfully that from my observation is trade that money for time. And you're giving doctors their time back to actually live their life. And I think unfortunately, most people have to experience an incident. I was at IDS in Germany this weekend, biggest dental conference in the world, met all these incredible dentists, right? And they're telling me like, "Oh, I had this incident where like my daughter got sick and I realized I need to stop working so much," or "My husband got XYZ." And you're like, my mission here is how do we help dentists realize that in their 20s, in their 30s, like it's not just about working your whole life. And so if you can partner with an organization where you're aligned with your values, and I think that's something that I'd also love to ask you about is your values as an organization. You are trading money for time, which ultimately is a form of wealth and freedom. So on that note, do you guys have company values?
Yeah. I mean, culture is everything about our business. I
Yeah.
mean, the first and foremost, you know, our business was again built by dentists for dentists, and that term's used a lot in the space now, but it reigns true to today. Even though the company's grown and evolved, I'd say the culture is exactly the same. So a little bit less on, what are specific values. We're here to empower our dentist partners to be successful. And that is ultimately what we do. Everything we've built around that. Our growth of the company is solely focused on making sure that our partners, have satisfaction and are successful. As we talked about before, that level of success can be all different types of things. It can be financial, but I think you said it really well there. Financial success isn't everything. And I think if you polled all of our partners, yes, it's a great opportunity in the space to be successful from a financial perspective, but it's also a community. And I mean by that, dentistry is a lonely profession. That's
Oh,
something I've
yeah.
learned over the years. You're kind of stuck in your own four walls. You've got a team around you. You're doing kind of redundant, same things day in, day out. and really isolated from, the rest of the dental world. And you have study clubs and all that, but it's very much on a, quarterly basis, or different times that pop up. What we've always wanted to do at MB2 is have a place that ultimately, regardless if it's private practice, DSOs, but just the best situation professionally for a dentist to be in. That's kind of where we've always viewed the business, is having that, autonomy, which I think is important in terms of, everyone says clinical autonomy. So we'll go there. Clinical autonomy is 100% what we do. We do not, by design, through like our entire operations team, do anything clinically. And that's by design. We're not dentists. We're not doctors, right? With no business telling you what to do clinically. But also, I think it's important, like if you're partnering with a group and you're looking at potentially selling your practice, it's what type of, and you're staying on. Like this, we're saying not the person that's retiring. If you're retiring, you're leaving tomorrow, maximize value, sell it, right? But if you want to continue, right? Because I don't think a lot of people want to completely just step away
Right.
or point. Our average owner age is 46 now.
Oh my
And
God. So
so,
they're young.
yes, yeah, right. And so it's different, right? We're not attracting I'm retiring next year. You're attracting hey, I want to be rewarded, take some chips off the table for everything that I've invested and built within this office. I want to still own my business, but I want support. I want to be, I see the consolidation taking place in the space. It's more difficult to negotiate with the vendors. The payers won't even pick up my phone call. I need support, but I'm not ready to give up all of that. And we always kind of tell partners, we do discovery days. Number one, you have 100% clinical autonomy post-partnership, hands down. And even though in that scenario I said before, if we're investing in acquiring 60% of that practice, our intention going forward is to not make 60% of the decisions. I always tell partners, like, you're going to know your practice better than we ever will. I mean by that is, your team, your patients, what's right for that individual location. And we are going to support and trust you to make those right decisions. However, you're not going to have to do it by yourself. Not all those decisions are on your shoulders. We are going to give you insight, tools, resources, people, data to help make decisions within the office, but not try to take away from everything that you've ultimately built. And part of that too, it's taking off the things that, again, you're not trained to do, nor is it a value add for, a dentist spending, like you're talking about your dad, doing payroll in the middle of the night. That's the last thing they need to be doing, right?
It's so
And so,
silly, and it's like a form of control is what it is, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's all control, and control is an illusion. So let me ask you something, because on this note, I know we're about to wrap up. There's studies recently that have shown that, over healthy eating, over avoiding, like, smoking cigarettes and all those things would actually increases longevity as community, and it's something that a lot of people don't really know, and I think it's killing dentists, right? And so I'm very curious what sort of community initiatives MB2 has on a very tactical level for dentists.
yeah. So, I mean, getting our partners talking constantly is a huge part of our business. So we actually have an internal app within the organization that's really evolved over time. That's a communication platform for all of our partners to ask questions, not only clinically, which is really cool to see, just different clinical questions, things pop up, but even, things around, hey, I'm going to be in Dallas this week, and anyone know a great restaurant? So we're trying to create this communication platform to where they're speaking. We also get our partners together really regularly. What I mean by that is, we do 2 big owner trips a year, which we've always done, forever. And so we bring all of our owners in. We got Lake Tahoe coming up here in the
Oh
next
my
year.
god. Can I
They're
come?
fun, right? Yeah. Come on down. Um, it really, again, those aren't built towards you're listening to Dr. V and me talk about economics and things like that. It's for doctors to get together, collaborate, have fun, bring your spouse, and really just create an environment to where you don't feel like you're alone all the time. And then it's really cool to see as relationships developed amongst partners, people become really good friends, maybe live in, a guy in Michigan and a guy in Florida, continue to hang out and talking all the time and collaborating. That's all by design. And also we spend a lot of time as a management team kind of out in markets of just getting people together. Because again, back to that isolation thing, it's real, right? And
Oh,
so,
I tell
go,
people the first day of practicing was the worst day of my life.
yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, I love my job because I love being surrounded by people that I like to work with that are like-minded, and
Totally.
you kind of energizes you every single day. And so we try to get all of our partners together regularly, and we're so spread out, but we send people out to just put dinners together, or maybe go to a game, get a box out of hockey game or whatnot, just to get people together, communicating, talking, kind of being like-minded. I think that's something we've really focused around. And as we continue to get bigger, it's a challenge. It's not easy to do, but it's something that you have to continue to invest in to make sure you're creating that community of docs to where people, it's kind of like we want all of our doctor partners to also be, very proud of what they built in their individual markets, right? And so you have that loyalty to, hey, I've built this great practice, and this is my baby. But also feel like I'm also part of this bigger organization. I have pride that I'm an MB2 partner, and I want to bring in new partners, my friends, colleagues, anyone I know, because they're going to deliver, what they say they're going to do. And I firsthand have that experience that, we do right by our partners. I always tell people,
I mean,
MB2 is not a perfect organization. We'll screw things up. Like, we're not perfect, but we've always stuck to the premise that we are going to do right by our partners. We're going to ensure that our partners are first and foremost. We have investors, we have lenders. Our focus as a management team is to make sure our partners are successful first. That happens, the investors are going to be just fine.
wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Justin. This has honestly been so cool. Like, I've always thought of all the DSOs and DPOs I know out there. From what I've heard, you guys are incredible. And so I'm just so excited to be able to share this for our listeners because I really think this is the future. Like, I really think if you're out there and you're listening, get your practice to a great point. We said $2 million of revenue. And from there, I've applied to MB2. So thank you for hopping on. And where can people find you?
You go to MB2.com. You could always just call the office. We'll put you in touch with one of our doctor partners. So please don't hesitate.